Like I was just living through this fog and it was awful. I couldn't believe it. But I do honestly believe that everything on my path has served a purpose and meant something.
If you guys are like me and wanting to be more mindful about what's in your products, how many toxins are in your products, and making sure that you're putting good things on your skin and into your body, I highly recommend Osea. I did a total revamp on all my products, and this is one I have been using and now is a staple in my bathroom. I particularly love their Ocean Eyes Age Defining Serum. I feel like I don't have bags under my eyes anymore, and I just feel really good putting this on my skin, knowing something good is going on my skin and into my body. So if you want to check out Osea's products, use our code QTCPOD10 to get 10% off your first purchase.
I'm so excited to welcome our next guest all the way from Philly. Welcome Suzie Welsh Divine to Quiet the Clock.
Thank you for having me, Beth.
So excited to have you.
Great to be here.
And I'm very impressed by the journey, but then you and I were kind of laughing. It's like you get your solo time on the train.
I know. It's actually such a quick trip from Philadelphia.
Is it?
To New York. It's only an hour and a half on the train.
Okay.
And driving is quick too, but I didn't feel like dealing with parking. So just took the train and popped right over here.
Amazing and welcome. Well, so much to talk about. So you've been in women's health for a while, but you said, and obviously we've done some research before having you here, but you have been invested in this in women's health from a very young age.
Yes. I went to Malawi in Africa when I was 16. It's a tiny little landlocked country in southeastern Africa. And I learned so much when I was there. I mean, we have a lot of poverty, obviously, and issues here in the States. But it was different traveling to a foreign country and really seeing systemic health issues and poverty at such a young, impressionable age. And it really changed the trajectory of my life without me realizing it. When I came back, I really knew that I wanted to get into healthcare at large. I didn't know what that would look like. And I went to nursing school at UVA. And out of there, I started working in women's health. So at the bedside. And then that's what led me to doing what I do today. But yes, I really credit my time in Malawi for bringing me here.
Yeah, that's such an incredible experience to have at such a young age to then give you this clarity of direction, because a lot of us don't get that so early. And I think that creates a lot of angst and anxiety. And we talk about like timelines and pressures and uncertainty and not knowing like what we want or what fulfills us. And you learned that very early on.
Yes, I am lucky to have great parents who said, okay, sure, you can go to Africa.
I was wondering what prompted the trip to Africa at 16.
Yeah, I had a friend that went with a group called Global AIDS Interfaith Alliance, and they do amazing work all throughout Malawi. And yeah, that's why I ended up there. My parents had to, I think, turn over guardianship of me for like the time that I was there to someone that I was traveling with, which is pretty crazy. And
Could you imagine doing that as a mom? I'm like, I
know. It's pretty scary. And I got malaria when I was there too. So I was very sick. And my mom said she'll never forget. She got a phone call from the man, Stephen, who was my guardian while I was on the trip. And he said, oh, Margaret, Suzie is a touch of malaria. My mom was like, that's like being a touch pregnant. You either have it or you don't. And it's funny now being in fertility, hearing my mom say that, because I'm like, you kind of can be almost like a touch pregnant now that, I've been through and lived in this world. So it always stays with me in my mind. It's a funny story.
Oh
from
my gosh.
That time.
Wow. When did you find yourself in your career in the fertility space?
So I was in my early 20s. I think I was 24 when I started working at Penn Fertility, which Penn Medicine is sort of one of our big health systems in Philadelphia and like really Pennsylvania. Now they've sort of taken over. And I was an IVF and fertility nurse. So counseling hundreds of women and couples coming through looking to get pregnant or freeze their eggs. I think the year before I started or right before I started is when ASRM sort of really recognized egg freezing as a
2012.
viable option for fertility preservation for
So
women.
you were, like,
so I was
right in
like
it.
right there. And it was when we were also starting to do a little bit more with the pre-genetic embryo screening and testing, which was really cool. ICSI was being used. And it was a very unique time. And I really learned so much. And I kept hearing my patients say, like, no one ever told me, right? No one ever told me about this. And that's why what you're doing, all of, anything we can do to shed light and bring awareness to fertility for males and females is so important.
It's interesting to hear. I mean, that is still the narrative. It's still so it's interesting to hear, like, 2012 is when the label is lifted and when we're in 2024 and it's still the narrative of, like, why didn't anyone tell me? Like, why do you think that is?
I think some of it is that we don't have standardized sex education in our school systems. So we don't really learn about our bodies unless we're at a school that's offering this, right? So if you're in a public school and lucky to have that, or a private school and getting really helpful sex education at a young age is critical. My school had that. And then when I was at UVA, obviously I was in biology classes and I did an English class actually about sex education in the United States. So this has clearly been an underlying theme for me. But I really think that's the root cause, is that as young adults, we're not learning what we need to learn about how our bodies work. And it's basic information, and we should all have access to health information and learn more about our bodies.
Yeah, it's really devastating the way that women do eventually learn about it, whether it's like finding yourself in a fertility clinic to freeze your eggs too late or too old, or going through fertility treatments. Like, it feels like those are the moments we're unfortunately learning about these things.
Exactly. And it's not just the people who will face infertility, whether it's primary or secondary. We all need to know about this, because you're going to have a friend that's going to go through it, or a sister or a brother. And you should be informed about how fertility works. It's basic reproduction.
Or just your how your body works, period. What was it like? And I think you did a post on this about, well, a couple things. One being 24, right? Probably not thinking about any of the stuff for yourself, but really being in the throes of helping other women and supporting other women or couples through this. Like, what was that like for you as a 24-year-old?
It was really hard, if I'm being honest. It was, we say not to take our work home with us. But as a nurse, I think it's really hard to delineate and separate your role as a supporter at work and leave that at work and not bring it home, especially when it's patients that you're working with every day for months or years. It's different when you're in the hospital, right, with inpatient, and you kind of can leave that patient and go home for the day. This, you're really building a powerful relationship with your patients if you're doing a good job as a nurse, and particularly in this role. But having to call someone and tell them that they're not pregnant is probably like one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. And I faced a lot of challenges, but that never got easier.
Yeah, I can't
imagine.
Right, the
more that you do it.
And you as a nurse and nurses in general, I have such respect for nurses. I had such admiration. I had an ex-boyfriend who was stage 4 cancer and spent a year in the hospital. So I was there every day, and I just saw firsthand the role of a nurse. And it is very different than a role of a doctor. Like, you have very, not that doctors don't, but like, you have very invested relationships. And this is sort of silly, but I love the show The Resident. I don't know if you know that show, but there is this scene where one of the nurses is like, they're our patients. We see them every day. We do this with them. And it's so true. You have a very unique role there because you have such strong connections with the patients.
Definitely. And I think, reproductive endocrinology is unique in that the doctors are typically like seeing these patients every day as well, because they're, you're coming in for monitoring appointments or different consults. So it is an area where a doctor might be seeing their patient just as much as the nurse, whereas you're you're totally right. In other practice areas, you might not have that same connection, which is special.
Where in your career did you start to think about filling some gaps? Did you ever see yourself as an entrepreneur?
I did. I really did. I always knew I wanted something different for my career path. I've always been a creator, trying to think outside the box.
Love that.
Definitely think differently. And it was probably goes back to before my time at Penn when I was working inpatient in labor and delivery and postpartum. And I kept saying, like, why aren't we teaching more women about postpartum care? Like, you're sending these people home and they have no idea what to expect, right? You're sending them home with a little human. I'm 22 and I'm like, bye, good luck. Here's your discharge training. It's really frightening.
I remember bringing my son home. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? I have no idea.
Exactly. And so one of my first ideas was really thinking about like postpartum concierge services. And then when I transitioned into fertility, it became much broader than that, right? And to your point of looking at the whole reproductive cycle and that point of no one ever told me. So women, when we're going through, infertility, pregnancy, postpartum, we're not sick, right? Usually when we're going through this, we're not sick. And the US health system really looks from a lens of sick care and primary care rather than preventative and community care. And so that's really what my mind shifted to and why I started Binto 8 years ago now, which is crazy. So
time flies.
Yes, time flies.
I want to go back to what you said about kind of always knowing that you wanted to do something different and like outside the box, which I celebrate and love. And we talk a lot about here on the podcast, sort of talk a lot about like the societal expectations or the blueprint that's laid out for us and that we're supposed to follow. So I'd love to hear more about just innately how you knew that blueprint maybe wasn't for you or that you wanted to do something different and give yourself permission to seek that out, because that can be hard and that takes risk and courage.
Definitely. So I grew up in a family where both my parents worked full time. My mom she just retired, but an amazing career. And so my parents were really equals. And I knew that I wanted that. I didn't want to stay home. I knew I wanted to be a mom, but I knew I wanted, other things, and a career was really important to me. And I think my dad was really the one who kept pushing me. So he always said to find your niche and excel. And he's an entrepreneur in his own right. So I think I got a lot of that from my father in that like curiosity and really narrowing down on the sector for a career, and that's women's health. So
you got a different blueprint.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if it was one particular thing or just me and knowing that, I really want a lot out of life, right? I only have one life, and I hope that I can make a difference in the lives of others. And I'm pretty sure that we're doing that with Bento.
Yes, amazing. Well, yes, I definitely want to talk about Bento. So 8 years, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
How has it been? What has been some of the challenges? What are the successes? What it's been like to carve this path for yourself?
It is hard. Every day is different, which is, one of the things that I love. I love that it's not the same routine every day. I need sort of different things to make me sane. But oh gosh, I was so young when I started and I really had no idea how to start a business. So I always say that I went to like the real world business school,
which I think is the best.
It is.
I think it's the best to dive. Like when I started my private practice, I did it all on my own. I figured, and there was a lot of road bumps and learning, but I feel so proud of that being the way that it happened because I learned so much. So I'm with you. You kind of just dive right in.
Exactly. You have to. And I think it's probably the best experience that we could have ever had.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not everyone is brave enough to do it, but not knowing enough is what makes you do it in the beginning, right? Because you're like, oh, I don't know any different. But we started out as sort of this birch box of fertility. So it was getting women access to safe and effective over-the-counter products for their different fertility diagnosis. So we were really narrowed in on infertility or supporting those who were just thinking about trying to conceive. And we were curating other products at the time. And then we quickly learned that there was like nothing in this space 8 years ago, really looking at the reproductive life cycle from a brand perspective when it comes to products. So we're really the ones that like created this market for products around reproductive health and fertility. So we now have our own brand of products, and we still curate and match people with specific ones. And then we also have telehealth. And I think that's what is a really key differentiator factor in Binto is that my co-founder and I are both licensed health providers. So people want to talk to us. Fertility is confusing.
Yes.
It's overwhelming.
Yes.
And sometimes you're not getting that hand-holding you need from a clinic. So we can sort of just be that coach in the middle to just literally answer your questions for less than or equal to the price of a copay. And so it's really reaching women where they are from the comfort of their own home and getting you access to a provider.
How'd you know what products you wanted to start developing? Is it in your career you saw gaps or things that weren't being offered? So
absolutely. So the biggest one was prenatal vitamins.
Because
and folate.
You do these like series on your Instagram where you kind of review.
Exactly. That is inside the vitamin aisle.
Yeah, because that is a confusing thing on to know what prenatal to choose.
Very confusing.
There's a million out there.
Yep. So it was, I guess like a year or so into my work at Penn when I started looking more into over-the-counter products, and I kept getting more questions around them. Like, should I be taking maca? What about royal jelly or bee pollen? I'm like, what is this? So we started diving a little bit deeper. I think Penn was doing a study at the time of vitamin D's role in fertility, which is really fascinating. And it just piqued my curiosity. And I'm like, well, what are safe and complementary things that we can be doing in conjunction with traditional medicine? Right. Because there's a place for both. We need both. And the prenatal vitamins that we would offer were all prescription. And a lot of them don't have what you need. So like some of them wouldn't have iron. Some of them would use folic acid. And I know there's a whole camp that's, folic acid versus folate. I think both are, okay. Not all of them would come with a DHA. So then you have to remind people that they need a DHA. And then, what about CoQ10? What dose of CoQ10, depending on the patient's age, her diagnosis, et cetera. And that's really what led us to Bento.
Yeah, we've been having this conversation about like the intersection of both and where that is, because sometimes it feels polarizing versus like, more supplementation, diet, lifestyle versus like Western medicine. And kind of where do you see it now, or because you said we need both. So how do you see that?
We need both.
Yeah,
I'm a huge proponent of using sort of more Eastern functional medicine and traditional medicine. Right, IVF works for a lot of people, and the drugs that are used are effective. So I think, if you need to do IVF in order to conceive, that's okay, right? We shouldn't put shame on people for needing to use prescription drugs or treatment. And you can still do your complementary therapies like your supplements and acupuncture therapy, whatever it is. I think like that's really, they should be merged together.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do that more across medical care in the US, like outside of fertility as well.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you that more, because in my own fertility journey, like I have experienced, I'll speak only for myself, that there can be two, like I almost describe as like they're speaking two different languages.
Yes.
And then you're hearing one thing here and one piece of information there. And, I do want to talk about your fertility journey as well, but you're kind of, your head is spinning. And it's so unfortunate to hear too, like how there are some prenatals out there that don't even have what women need. And again, comes in this idea of like, being misinformed or not educated on enough of what we actually need.
Exactly. I think, the supplement industry isn't regulated. So that's also scary. I mean, the products need to be made in an FDA approved facility. But beyond that, it's really, my job as a brand to make sure I'm choosing a lab that has certain, like the highest certifications possible, such as NSF, GMP certified, what kind of testing is getting done after a run is completed. And hopefully we'll see more regulation with time as like the government starts to pay more attention to this. But that's, a big scary piece of why I, as a nurse, was very interested in this part, and what we're putting in our body does play a role and can impact our fertility. To what degree and for every person, we're still learning that.
Right. So it sounds like, do you personalize the supplement? You do.
Yes.
So can you tell us how you do that?
Sure.
That'd be
so.
amazing.
We have a health survey on our site. It's an algorithm where we're asking people to input health data, and then we can match you with the products. And then the other way is through telehealth consults. So you could meet with us that way, and we can help you build your own kit.
Yeah, that's amazing, because like it should be personalized in that way. Yeah.
Yep. So if your doctor wants you getting, 800 milligrams of CoQ10, we can do that. And get it to you in a little customized daily packet. Whereas if you're like buying something off the shelf or pre-made, you might be overdosed or underdosed in certain areas of products that you need. Yep.
Yeah. So what you guys give is a lot of trust in that they're getting exactly what they need in the right dosage and good, right quality.
Yep.
What have you seen over the last 8 years in terms of like the support with telehealth? Like, what are some of the like narratives you hear, emotional struggles that you hear? Like, what are some of the themes over the last 8 years that women are coming to you for that emotional support?
So we do Binto's really big in the South and Midwest. So there's a complete lack of access to reproductive care, if we think about it, in Middle America, and it's only getting worse. So a lot of the people we talk to are confused, and maybe they don't want to go to their family medicine doctor, who's likely an older man. And so they find trust in that we are females, so we can identify and relate to them personally, and they feel a little bit safer in talking to us. And that's really the key thing that we've noticed, is that they say they feel safe and they feel that their questions are being answered, their voices are being heard, and it's better than searching on Google. So I often call it a pendulum. So you have like waiting in the doctor's office, where you're waiting for up to 6 weeks, if not more. And then you have, your online TikTok, which is great. I mean, we're on TikTok, Google with their AI now. And in the middle is Bento. So where you can get access to someone within a 24-hour time frame and have your questions
because
answered.
The Google, and I've done it myself, the Google deep diving
I know.
I'm like 3 in the morning Googling all these things. That's where I'm looking to get because you don't have that access to your doctor right away. So that's like you're going there for any kind of answer, and then you get conflicting information. So yeah, it's
totally
amazing.
Especially during this time, right? And like the 2-week wait, where you're like, wait, are my boobs sore? What does that mean? Is this happening? What does that mean? And even though, here I am, I already know all the answers, but I would still do, would spiral and do the same thing.
Yeah, which I'd love to talk about your fertility journey, because even as a nurse with all this information and all this knowledge, and maybe not being a woman that's like, I didn't know any of this, like you knew a lot of this. What was that like for you? Yeah, awful.
I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy if I had a worst enemy.
You don't seem like you have any enemies. You're very nice.
I might. I don't know. But I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but it was hell. Like I went through hell and back.
Yeah.
And it was particularly hard because I never got a break from my fertility. So whereas, a lot of people can throw themselves into their work, I just felt so foggy. Like I was just living through this fog, and it was awful. I couldn't believe it. But I do honestly believe that everything on my path has served a purpose and meant something for me. Like my work in Africa led me to nursing. That led me to launch Bento. And then going through infertility to get my oldest son, Pierce, who's now 2.
I love that name.
Oh, thank you. I know. I love it too. And I think it makes me the best founder and CEO for this company. And it gives us even more trust.
Yes.
Because it didn't just happen easily for me. And like, I really truly can understand what pregnancy loss feels like, what IVF feels like, and what it feels like to be the patient.
Yeah, because I think that as much as you can know clinically or through
Yeah.
your experience, unless you're a woman that has gone through it, you can't really
No.
understand it. And when I went through it, I had worked with so many women as a therapist who have been through loss and IVF and so many, challenging bumps along the way. And I remember after having my miscarriage, I was like, I knew they were warriors.
Yeah.
I knew they were warriors. But then after I went through it, I'm like, and I went through one, which no one should have to go through any, but I was like, oh my God. I was like texting all of them. I'm like, you are all so incredible. Like so you just really can't, even though you've seen it, you've worked with it, you've been side by side with women going through it. There's something else that you get to know having experienced it yourself.
Absolutely. It's really, it's painful. And like you said, we're warriors. But I remember my mom always saying, "Oh, you're so strong." And I would get so upset being like, I don't want to be strong anymore.
Yeah.
Like I just wanted to to work already. And that grit and like the strength is really, really hard. And I think the hardest part is that, I feel so grateful and I want to acknowledge that. Sorry, I hit my mic.
That's okay.
I just want to acknowledge that not everyone gets to the other side of infertility. And I feel like those stories are the ones that need to be shared.
My thought on that, that's interesting to think about too. I was at an event a while ago and it was around, egg freezing and embryos. And there was a woman that stood up and said, what about when it doesn't work? What about those stories? And it kind of was like very powerful. And I think there's this discomfort of knowing those stories because you want to stay hopeful that it always works.
Yeah, totally. When you're in the thick of it, you have to keep going, but only when you've hit your limit. And that's what my therapist would always say to me. She's like, only right? You like,
what
no one else
therapist
knows.
You have.
Yes, Robin. And she went through it herself too. And I think that, that helped. But yes, get a therapist. It's the most, I would say, like the only thing that really, really got me through some dark times.
Yeah. We had a conversation yesterday with another guest about uncertainty. And that is something that so strongly exists in egg freezing and fertility. And I'm curious how you have helped yourself, but also your patients and people that come to Bento navigate the uncertainty of all this.
I'm terrible at that. Terrible. Like it's funny because I live in uncertainty with Bento, right?
Of course,
like
as
it's
an
so
entrepreneur,
risky. I'm like, Mom, Dad, husband, I'm quitting my job and launching this company. And they're like, what? What is wrong with you? So I'm comfortable with some level of risk and uncertainty. But when it came to my fertility and the question of me becoming a mom, it was terrible. I was not good at dealing with it. The therapy was really like one of the few ways. And then, of course, my Bento community. So all the other women that we've helped navigate this, sharing my story and having them, cheer me on. Those were probably the most helpful things.
Yeah. The uncertainty is it is so hard. It's so hard because I think we desire an outcome or a control.
We want control.
Yeah, control. Knowing when it's going to happen. And I know for myself, like the best things in my life have happened when I've least expected them. But you hate to hear those things when you're going through this.
I know.
I love what you said too. And I relate to this sort of purpose of looking at all these moments in our lives being purposeful and maybe not knowing why in the moment. But when you look back, it has a purpose. And well, two things I want to acknowledge is that because when I went through my miscarriage too, I one thing that grounded me or kept me one thing was like, okay, I'm going to pay this forward. Like now I can have these conversations from a really different lens.
Yes.
A really different perspective, relatability. And I'm like, there's got to be a bigger purpose to why this is happening right now. And I really feel that through this podcast and the conversations I'm able to have with other women and support other women. And I also want to acknowledge what a warrior you are to not get a break, like you said, to work in that fertility space as you're going. And on a very small scale, I can relate because I'm doing research for the podcast and I'm outreaching. But you were probably witnessing women being successful in their fertility journey and you weren't yet. So I imagine that was just really, really hard.
It was really hard. But I did, after my second miscarriage, I took 2 weeks off.
Good.
And I'm very fortunate to be the leader of my own employer, aka myself. And
but sometimes we're our worst bosses.
Exactly. But not every company, this is why we need coverage for pregnancy and, child loss, NICU stays, whatever. I'm not going to get on that soapbox, but I am so lucky that I am happy that I took those 2 weeks to myself. I told my husband, I was like, I need to step back and just do something else for 2 weeks because I can't keep hitting my head against the wall after this. So I did take a 2-week break, and I think that was probably like one of the best gifts I ever gave myself. But it's funny. It was, after I finally had my son, it was almost like a rebirth of myself and resurgence for Bento. Like I really do feel like I was in such a fog during that time, and it just totally re-energized me to continue this important work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's hard to explain it. Like I know what you're saying in the fog, and I think it's hard to explain if you haven't been in it. But for me, it felt like everything was here, and it was all like the grief, and then the plan, and then the things to do, and then slowly you start to widen out and let life back in again. So I relate to that too.
Yes, that's exactly what it was like.
Yeah. What is the future of Binto?
We really want to win in the fertility space. So we are profitable and scaling and really looking to take over. So I don't want to give away too many things that we're working on, but it's been quite a journey. And my co-founder, Andy, is absolutely the best. We were friends in middle school.
Stop it.
We weren't good friends. We were just in the same. So how
did you guys come together?
So it was a few years into Bento, and she emailed me and she was like, hey, I want to leave. She was working as a PA at a fertility clinic in Delaware. She's like, I would love to work with you. And I'm like, great, I can't pay you. Do you want to do our customer chat? And she's so smart. It was way too low level for her, but it's startup life. So you're doing you wear all the hats. And she's our COO. So she's responsible for all of our inventory, all of our data reporting, analytics. She's absolutely fabulous, brilliant math, numbers, organization mind. And I'm the creative one. So it's a good match. And that's how we came back together. And I think it's kind of nice that we, have been friends since middle school, but not Beth. We were in kind of two different groups. And I think that makes it way easier and that we're good friends now.
It's so cool to watch how life sort of unfolds in these really unexpected ways. And I have a very similar story with my best friend, Shelly, who is now the executive producer of this podcast. I have a group therapy practice, and an admin at the time had resigned, and I'm in Kansas City visiting Shelly, and she was in between things and same. She's brilliant and so smart, and this was just really too low level for her. And I was just like, well, would you want to do this? In the meantime, fast forward, she is running the show here now. So a similar story. But it just life just sort of if we allow it and if we kind of let go of the control and the ease, I feel like life really unfolds in really amazing, amazing ways.
It does. Yeah. And we're lucky to have women that support women in our corners.
Yeah, 100%.
So it feels good.
As a kind of outside the box, creative risk taker, do you have any advice for women that desire more? I think, again, we get stuck in these blueprints if we weren't encouraged early on at a young age to go outside of that. But I think I know, and I'm sure there is so much fulfillment outside of the blueprint. Yes. But I think there's a lot of fear on deviating from the path. Any advice for people listening that are thinking they want more, or there is something more, they desire something different?
If you have that gut feeling, then it's usually right and onto something. So my biggest thing is listen to your gut because it's usually right. And we call it the nurse's instinct or nurse's gut. But I do think I have that. And that's how I really felt with Bento. And I was like, I think I'm on to something and I need to start this. So listen to your gut and surround yourself with people who are going to cheer you on, and cut the negativity because they're not really there to support you. So go with your gut and get the right people in your corner and you will succeed in whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice because I think there's a lot of external noise that quiet that gut. And then
we all have it.
If you're listening, if you can tune into the gut and you're listening to it and you have naysayers around you, then you could start to self-doubt. So I love that advice. Well, Suzie, thank you so much for being here. Keep us posted on all things Binto and anything that Quiet the Clock can do to support you in that. And can't wait to see all the amazing things you continue to do.
Loved meeting you, Beth.
Oh, me
and
too.
Thank you for hearing me and letting me share my story.
Oh, thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so powerful to continue to share and sort of bring these stories out of the shadows. And, you know, there are women that have been through it and want to support each other as we continue to navigate all of these, just navigate life.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You guys, I do not get on a flight anymore without my Bombas compression socks. They are a travel staple for me, especially on longer flights. The socks help improve blood flow from your legs to your heart, which obviously is so essential. I just love these socks so much. And I want you guys to have an opportunity to check out these socks too. So use our code QTC20 for 20% off your first purchase of Bombas.
Hey guys, I'm Beth. Thank you so much for tuning in to Quiet the Clock. If you want to hear more episodes and learn more about how to dismantle societal timelines, live life on your own terms, live life fully and authentically, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And you can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Quiet the Clock Pod.